So today we have with us to present on the evolution of sex and debunking myths about sex and gender in part one, gender binary, Dr. Abby Hafer. Abby Hafer is an author, a scientist, an educator, and a public speaker. She wrote a book, The Not So Intelligent Designer, Why Evolution Explains the Human Body and Intelligent Design Does Not, which became a #1 bestseller on Amazon in the category of theism. Ironic, she knows. Her public speaking has taken her all over the US, and she has given many radio interviews. Her scientific career includes a doctorate in zoology from Oxford University, many research projects in physiology, and a stint monitoring fish populations in the Bering Sea. More recently, she published This Is Your Brain on Trump and Trump and the Gish Gallop. Her journal article, No Data Required, Why Intelligent Design is Not Science, was published in the American Biology Teacher, and she teaches human anatomy and physiology at Curry College and lives in Massachusetts. Please welcome Dr. Abby Hafer.
Okay, thank you. In the beginning, it was Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. I don't know if you've heard that old bad excuse for homophobia when you were growing up, but I did. There's just one problem with that, and it's this. It's wrong in every possible way. It's stupid. There's absolutely nothing correct about that statement. So let's just start again, and I'll do it right this time. In the beginning, there was one sex, and it was female. An individual reproduced by growing a copy of herself and releasing that copy into the environment. This was certainly the case with the first self-copying molecule. Since life began with the first self-copying molecule, this means that females are the first original sex. Let that sink in a while. In the beginning, it wasn't Adam and Eve. It was Eve. In the beginning, it wasn't this. It was this. Now, this is a picture of bacteria replicating, that is to say, copying themselves, and bacteria came along well after that first self-copying molecule. But individual molecules don't photograph very well, so I'm showing you bacteria because bacteria are still pretty ancient. So Eve, that first self-copying organism, made copies of herself. And those copies made more copies, and more copies, and more copies. Sometimes those copies had mutations. So in biblical terms, Eve begat Eve, and Eve, and Eve, and Eve. And one of those Eves had a mutation, that is, a slight genetic change, and begat a line of Evelyns. Some of these mutated further and begat lines of Ediths and Ednas. Meanwhile, the Eves were still busy begetting more Eves, but some of these mutated and became Esmes and Esmeraldas. So the first family didn't look like this, but more like this. So females were really doing pretty well before males came along. Thank you very much. The problems began when Eve's daughters, Edith and Esmeralda, started competing with each other. And thus was the evolutionary arms race begun. The problem was made worse by the fact that Edith continued to mutate and got new advantages over Esmeralda. Meanwhile, poor Esmeralda didn't always mutate fast enough to keep up. Many lines of Esmeraldas were wiped out because of this, and that was the end of their evolutionary line. But then, a mutation took place that allowed some Esmeraldas to swap genes with other members of the population, members who were not Esmeraldas. And this gene swapping saved the day. That's because some of these newly acquired genes allowed the new Esmeraldas to compete successfully with that pesky Edith. The new Esmeralda was no longer a pure Esmeralda. It was true, but by golly, she was alive. So the new, improved Esmeraldas got ahead in the evolutionary arms race. And it was good. And that, folks, is how sex was born. And it was good. According to evolutionary biologist W.D. Hamilton, one major benefit that sexual reproduction gives us is the ability to stay ahead of parasites. Parasites work by adapting very precisely to a very specific host species. The only hosts that are likely to survive are those that have the ability to mix their genetics quickly through sexual reproduction and spread beneficial mutations through the population quickly, also by sexual reproduction. Other biologists have also suggested that the gene exchange done by sexual reproduction also means that siblings are not exact copies of one another and are therefore less likely to compete directly with one another for survival. But one way or another, that's what males are for. Males are genetic mixers. They speed up evolutionary change. Since a male's genes can only survive by contributing to somebody else's reproduction, males have evolved a wide variety of mechanisms for trying to persuade a female to mate with them. There's showing off. Everybody knows about peacocks using their tails to show off and try to attract mates. But did you know about Technicolor vomit? Crustaceans called ostracods vomit luminous mucus in order to attract mates. Isn't that sexy? There's also showering females with gifts. Humans do this. Did you know that bowerbirds do too? Here's a male bowerbird making a really showy nest in order to attract a female. Here's the finished product. There's also trapping females. Trapping isn't pretty, but evolution isn't pretty. There's growing longer penises than the competition. This is what barnacles do. Barnacles are stationary as adults, so getting sperm to the nearest female is a challenge for male barnacles. They also have to compete with each other over this. They are up to the challenge. Barnacles can grow penises up to 8 times the length of their own bodies. Barnacles have the longest penises in the world, compared to their body length anyway. Remember this the next time that somebody brags about the size of theirs. So, I've explained why sexual reproduction is useful. Let's move on to the whole question of what is natural. The cartoon here, of course, depicts unnatural acts with a sheep. This brings up a really important point. People will spend a whole lot of time telling you what kind of sex is natural and what kind of sex is unnatural, according to them. But you have just learned that sexual reproduction exists as a means of genetic mixing. That's all it is. This genetic mixing does not require a specific set of gender or sexual characteristics. So I'm going to state a bunch of mistaken assumptions that people have about sex and gender, and then take a look at males and females throughout the animal kingdom. You will see how brilliantly creative evolution by natural selection can be, and how diverse the results are in the animal kingdom. There's no one set of rules. Sexuality is a free-for-all. You will also begin to notice how many of these mistaken assumptions are based on some humans' wishful thinking, usually about what they would like to see in their own human society. Mistaken assumption number 1. Evolution means that males will have no parental involvement and will leave care of the infants and children to females, right? Wrong. Here's just one example. Emus. Those big flightless birds from Australia. Once the eggs are laid, the male emu is the one who takes care of the eggs and incubates them. Once the eggs hatch, the male raises the chicks. Mistaken assumption number 2. Evolution means that males will always be bigger than females and will dominate them, right? Wrong. Here is a picture of an anglerfish, which is actually a picture of 3 anglerfish. Male anglerfish are tiny compared to females. To continue their existence past a certain age, a male anglerfish must attach himself to a female and fuse his body with hers. This female anglerfish has 2 attached males. In the biological sciences, having different sexes of different sizes is called sexual dimorphism. You can tell that the people who invented this term were men, since sexual dimorphism is defined as males being bigger than females. When the females of a species are larger than the males, this is called reverse sexual dimorphism. In other words, human male biologists just assumed that males being bigger than females was the natural state of being. Mistaken assumption number 3. But males are at least always the ones with the Y chromosomes, right? Wrong. Birds. All birds. All male birds have 2 X chromosomes. It's the females who have the Y chromosomes. This is true for some male insects like moths and butterflies as well, and some crustaceans and some reptiles, including the huge lizards called Komodo dragons. It's called the ZW system instead of the XY system, but that's just to make it easier for people to talk about it. Mistaken assumption number 4. Males and females have separate bodies, right? Wrong. Many animals are hermaphrodites. That is, they have both male and female reproductive organs. Most snails are hermaphrodites. So are many jellyfish and many worms. Mistaken assumption number 5. But male input is always required for reproduction, right? No. Bonnet-head sharks, black-tip sharks, leopard sharks, zebra sharks, small white-spotted bamboo sharks, many snakes including boa constrictors, and 50 species of lizards including Komodo dragons can all reproduce without males. Mistaken assumption number 6. But we always see pictures from the Bible of animals being saved from Noah's flood by going onto a boat, 2 by 2. 1 female and 1 male. That's what's natural, right? 2 by 2, 1 female and 1 male, right? Wrong. First, many species have some male homosexual individuals. For instance, rams. Yes, rams, that very symbol of raging male horniness. Rams are male sheep. About 8% of all rams form exclusively male-to-male pair bonds, forsaking all contact with female sheep. Some animals routinely practice lesbianism. For instance, this species of albatross has many same-sex female pairs who nest and raise chicks together. Some animals form trios, and some trios are for child rearing. For instance, these skuas. Skuas often nest as mixed-sex trios and raise chicks together. And some trios are for sex. This is a North Atlantic right whale. And this is a photograph of a female North Atlantic right whale having simultaneous sex with 2 males at once. And when I say simultaneous, I mean simultaneous. That, by the way, is an example of a multi-male breeding system where each female may have many male partners. For something more biblical, there are also multi-female breeding systems. That is, where one male may have many female partners. For instance, northern fur seals. This is a male northern fur seal with its many females, just like the Old Testament. But what about primates, our near relatives in the animal kingdom? Well, it turns out that our fellow primates have all different kinds of breeding systems. Here's a graph for you. This graph shows that some species of our fellow primates have multi-male breeding systems. Those are the solid dots on this graph. Some have multi-female breeding systems. Those are the open triangles. And some have monogamous breeding systems. Those are the open circles. As for humans, we are the little plus sign near the upper right. This graph, by the way, is a plot of testicle weight versus body weight in primates. Somebody checked to see if there was a correlation between that ratio and mating systems, but the results were not clear. You should know that homosexuality, lesbianism, and bisexuality are all found within non-human primates as well. Mistaken assumption number 7. But at least males are males and females are females, right? None of this cross-dressing or transgender stuff, right? Wrong. Transgender fish are common. First, barramundi. These fish transition from male to female. Most individuals mature as males. They become female after one or more spawning seasons. Most of the larger specimens are therefore female. Second, blue gropers. These change from female to male. This is a blue groper female. That's correct, it's not blue. It's the males that are blue. Blue gropers are a type of wrasse. Wrasses are famous for changing their sex, usually female to male. All blue gropers begin life as females. This is a blue groper male. This is how you get a blue groper male. Usually you will find only 1 or 2 male blue gropers in an area and a larger number of female gropers in the same area. Then, when the dominant male dies, the largest female grows, changes color and sex, and becomes the dominant male. Third, clownfish. These change from whatever to male or female. Yes, Nemo himself was gender fluid. Clownfish start life with no functioning gonads. They are neither sex. There is one breeding pair with a large female, a smaller male, and a bunch of non-sexual or sometimes male smaller individuals. If the female dies, then the male becomes female. If the male dies, then the largest non-breeding fish becomes male. Fourth, dwarf hawkfish. These are even more gender fluid. Hawkfish live in harems, with one dominant male mating with several females. When it comes to sex change, the size of the harem matters. Listen carefully now, because the plot to this is worse than a soap opera. If a male hawkfish takes on too many females, then one of the largest females will change sex, become male, and take over half the harem. But if that new male hawkfish loses a few females to other harems and is challenged by a larger male, then it goes back to being female. That way it doesn't lose precious energy fighting a losing battle. So the ability to change sex in both directions maximizes an individual's ability to reproduce. So, gender fluidity is the name of the game for many species. Mistaken assumption number 8. Okay, so it is clear that nature does not define sex roles. And it is clear that gender fluidity is real, but at least there are 2 sexes, right? I mean, at most 2, maybe 1.5 or 1, but 2 at most, right? Wrong again. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Tetrahymena thermophila, the organism with the most creative sex life that I know about. It has 7 sexes. You heard me, 7. No wonder it's one of my favorite organisms. This single-celled creature, which has been thoroughly studied by biologist Eduardo Arias, mostly reproduces without sex, dividing into two identical daughter cells. That's Eve begetting Eve again. But when food is scarce, the creature can opt for sexual reproduction, which, as I told you before, creates novel genetic combinations that may give daughter cells a better chance of surviving in a harsh environment. Such tough conditions also rewarded worthy of supreme respect, not because they are supernatural, but because they are life. And that is amazing and precious enough. Thank you. Yeah, bring the lights up, please. Well, thank you for coming.
You can ask some questions, perhaps?
Sure, I can answer some questions. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Now that I can. Yes, you were in the green sweatshirt. Did you have a question?
Yeah. No, I was curious about the example that you mentioned, the snail.
The snail, yes.
Yeah. So it reproduces. It has both male and female.
Sex organs, basically, or I should say gonad. Yeah, gonads will work. Yes.
And so how does? And so it can reproduce all on its own.
All on its own.
How does this idea that sex was invented to help diversify the genetic code of the organism? How does that fit in with this example?
Because biology is really weird, is the kind of the short answer. Well, first off, I should say I just used one example of a hermaphroditic species. There are many. Some of them can reproduce with other individuals, so you still get the genetic mixing. Some don't. In the plant kingdom, you see a lot of self-fertilizers, but you also see a lot of broadcasters. Some plants have both male and female individuals. Most plants have both. A botany professor of mine used to call this another trip around the barn, which is to say that evolution only moves forward. You really can't move back. But at the same time, sometimes in moving forward, it's doing something that was done before. So, you know, all I can say is biology is just weird. Sorry, is this making any kind of sense?
Yeah, it raises more questions though. But
of course it does.
It's
It's science. It always raises more questions. Back there, yes.
Given all of these animals were probably known for quite a long time, how is it that most biology textbooks have never talked about this kind of thing in an open way, to my knowledge?
Okay, well, actually, the start for this talk, do you mind if I back up a little bit here? Do you mind if I just take a few minutes to kind of explain sort of where I'm coming from and how I got started on all of this? What I have been doing for over 10 years at this point, my usual thing in public speaking is debunking intelligent design and creationism. And I'm an evolutionary I'm a zoologist by training. I now teach human anatomy and physiology. I realized that intelligent design is a political issue rather than a scientific one. I hope you all know that. And at one point, I realized that I already knew enough to debunk intelligent design, and what I needed to do was put it into a format that would be more successful politically. I made it into a talking points format, kind of like what I did here. So then in 2016, there was the Pulse nightclub shooting, there were all those bashing deals, and I again thought, I already know enough to debunk the gender binary. I learned about transsexual fish as an undergraduate in biology at Swarthmore College in the 70s. So that information has been around for a long time. That many animals are hermaphrodites, has been known for a long time. In fact, Charles Darwin dissected, I should explain barnacles. There are many different species of barnacles. I just used one example here. There's one species of barnacle that is hermaphroditic, but then there are also like little parasitic males that are independent, and then in a closely related species, there are just sort of the females and teensy little parasitic males. And he said, see, this shows that he was worried about evidence for evolution. But I can use it to show you that this stuff has been known for a long time. So yeah, fish I've known about since the 70s. Let's see, what were the other examples that I used? Because there's a whole bunch of good things there. Tetrahymena thermophila has been studied for about 30 years now, so that's been well known. So a lot of this stuff has been, oh, and I remember even in college, there was beginning to be the understanding of that there were homosexual and lesbian relationships in the rest of the animal world. I think the original sort of discovery like this was, I think it was the western black-backed gull, but I could be totally wrong in my memory on that. But I remember my professor, one of my biology professors, you know, putting an article on the door of his office talking about same-sex relationships in seagulls. So, you know, some of it has been around for a long, long time. Some of it is more recent. As far as a biology textbook goes, as I said, some of the stuff you would find in it, if not in a Bio 101 book, certainly in a marine biology textbook, you would hear about the fish. In a micro textbook, you might or might not find out about Tetrahymena thermophila, but you get the idea. The information is generally good.
Well, I guess I'm getting to the point of how is it that it took until the 1970s, when people have been observing animals for centuries and making notes, that even some of the primates were not acknowledged to have a vast variety. Even once evolution was discussed and debated, I think by 1900 people would have been noticing these things. Was it suppressed, is I guess my point? Or? I
don't know. I mean, it certainly wasn't suppressed in terms of what animals have what gonads. Because, as I said, Darwin was dissecting that and didn't consider it the least bit unusual to find a hermaphroditic species of barnacle. You know, I think it was, I think it's one of these weird things where there were not people like me jumping up and down and waving their hands around saying, rest of the world, please, biology, it's really weird. You know, I think that that's part of it. Probably some of it was people not wanting to see what they didn't want to see, or even not seeing or fully comprehending stuff that they weren't really prepared to comprehend. I think it can often be that way as well. We're not looking for something, so we don't see it. Animal behavior as a field of study, by the way, has only existed since about the 40s. So in terms of actually sitting down and watching animals interact and writing down what they do and trying to figure out what various social structures are and this kind of thing, as I said, that's really only been done since the 1940s. Yes?
For everything, I agree all the arguments that you have today. And after all, actually I've been visiting, I'm from China, and then I've been living in France for many years.
In France?
In France.
Mm-hmm.
And today your argument, actually they are all very good. However, I didn't hear that much in my home country or in Europe, because this is something that is very obvious and that
very averse?
Obvious.
Okay.
There's no need for argument. And the question comes to the U.S. is the country which has the highest, which has the most advanced technology and science in terms. The question comes to why I see there's still a struggle or a fight against the theism, which is very strong in this country. And I'm wondering if there's any background or reasons that you would like to share with us.
It probably has to do with fundamentalist Christianity, which absolutely positively does not want to know about evolution by natural selection. And unfortunately, they are very powerful politically. And this is why I said earlier that evolution is not a scientific issue. I mean, I think we can all agree on that. I'm just going to grab my water, sorry. Evolution by natural selection is agreed upon by, 99.9% of all scientists. But it's a political issue. And so politically powerful people who do not want to accept evolution by natural selection, and politically powerful people who absolutely positively do not want to think that, homosexuals or lesbians or whatever are in any way natural or okay or this kind of thing. They have a lot of political power, and they're very good at persuading people. And I've worked on lots of political campaigns. And the thing about politics is that you can have lots of great information, lots of very deep political thinking and good things going on, but when it comes down to a campaign, you have to have talking points. You have to have things that will fit on a poster. That's just the way politics works. And unfortunately, scientists are not really very good at that. I'm not blaming scientists, it's the opposite of the way we're trained. We are trained to present the evidence, say what we think the conclusion is, but pretty much let the data speak for itself. That's the way we are trained to operate, as doubtless nearly everyone here knows. So it goes against our training to get involved in the political arena and to argue for ideas rather than simply saying, here's the data. And that is why we have libraries full of evidence for evolution, and most people don't know it. And so that's why people like me kind of enter the political arena and enter the public speaking arena, because I'm trying to give talking points so that if people are talking to their state legislator, remember these things are political issues, if you're talking to a member of the school board, if you're talking to a state legislator or anybody like that, you need to have a few quick points already thought up and where you're able to say it in just a few moments. It's like what will fit on a poster. What can you say to a state legislator while you are riding an elevator with him? You have his complete attention for 30 seconds. What can you say? So this is why I do what I do, is to try and just provide talking points for people, because unfortunately here in the US it's a political issue. And as Sohan was saying, right now in Turkey, they're not allowed to teach evolution. And there are other countries that are going in that direction as well. So as I said, it's a political problem, certainly not a scientific one, unfortunately. I've been picking this side of the room for a while, so let's go over here in the braid there, yes. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to come back so I can hear you, and then I'll repeat the question.
On the utility of using the examples from the animal kingdom, from birds and fish and snails, etc., and showing the great diversity of sexual systems that they have in order to make conclusions and judgments about human social issues, such as the gender.
Okay, she is asking, I don't know if you were able to hear, what the utility is, do I have it right, of using animal examples to comment on a human issue. And I'll go back to the front to answer. Here is the thing. I've done a lot of studying of this issue, and what a lot of political entities and a lot of religions will do is that they will use what's called the argument from nature. That is an actual thing in Catholicism. It's what's called the argument from nature. And they basically say, look at nature, males, females, copulation, all of this kind of thing. See, that's what's natural. They're basically fooling people. They are not looking at nature, they are looking at the bits of nature that they happen to want to use. In many cases, I think they're just ignorant because, as I said, the field of ethology only came into existence in the 1940s. Though doubtless there had been farmers who occasionally got very frustrated at their homosexual sheep. But, you know, in general, a lot of this wasn't known until, you know, the last half century or so. But, as I said, there is this whole field of religious argument called the argument from nature. So that was the first thing that I did, basically crushing the argument from nature. It's like, okay, I win that argument. Now let's move on to the stuff about morality. That's why I had sort of part one and part two to this talk. Does that make more sense? Because a lot of people, I guarantee you, both in politics and in religion, will say, that's not natural, which is why I just told you all these things that really are natural, if by natural you mean happens in nature. Yes, back up.
So I have two questions. One, I'm curious of your hypothesis. Why the progressive left is not using the fact that majority of animals turns into homosexuality during overpopulation, especially things like dogs, for example. They're pretty prevalent in nature. Number one. Number two question I have for you.
I don't quite get the question.
There's been a lot of studies that majority of animal kingdom during overpopulation turn into homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering why progressive left does not use it a lot more. I never heard them using it when they argue for evolution against creationism. Why is it not part of the argument that is used?
Because it's a fairly subtle argument to use for evolution. As I said, at this point, the level of comprehension of evolution amongst creationists is pathetically bad. And so this is why and again, you have to use things that are easy to understand, easy to remember, easy to repeat. Those are what political arguments look like. So getting into the finer details of frequency-dependent selection and density-dependent selection are things that are really not going to work when I am talking to my state legislator in the elevator. So that's pretty much why. You know, if you're going to be talking to your state legislator and you have 30 minutes or 30 seconds to make your pitch, you say something like, if we are so intelligently designed, then why did my Aunt Mabel die by choking on her food? We've got one tube for air. We've got the same tube from here to here for food and water. That's why the Heimlich maneuver was invented. It's why food gets lodged in your trachea. Because from here to here, it's the same tube. Whales have two different tubes. One for air, one for food. Works much better. Why didn't we get that? That's the kind of thing that people who are not scientists can absorb quickly, and that's what we need.
So the second question I have for you is, when we as an atheist say we must or we have to, aren't we becoming the same religious proselytizers?
Well, what must and have to are you talking about?
The few things that you said we must or we have to when I was listening to you, for example.
We must protect the earth. I mean, I think that's a pretty good one to go with.
Yeah, but that's still the same religious proselytizer, just on a different side. Right?
No, it's called persuasion, and I'm willing to do it. I mean, I'm serious about that. This is, again, something that scientists don't like doing. We like being able to present the data and stand back and just let people understand the brilliance of our work. We have seen how that doesn't work. So I'm willing to get out there and actually use persuasive language because that's the language that works in politics. Personally, I'd rather be in the lab, but I think that this is something that's important to do. And the cat there, yes.
That creature, the tetrahydra, whatever that was long.
Tetrahymenotromathala, yes.
You said it had 7 sexes. How? I'm curious as to how this works. Like
it always breaks people's minds figuring this one out. The good news is, one thing I ought to do actually is put sort of a reserve slide on this set. I might do that when I go home tonight. showing you sort of the how Tetrahymena Dromophila manages to reproduce sexually. I already told you it can reproduce asexually, just, you know, by budding. But the way it works is basically this. It makes 2 reproductive nucleuses, okay? So it will, okay, I'll start from the beginning. You have the 7, we'll call them mating types. And mating type 1 can mate with types 2 through 7. Mating type 2 can mate with type 1 and types 3 through 7 and on around. You get the idea. So any given mating type can mate with the other 6. And roughly the way it works is that it will make 2 haploid nucleuses. You know what haploid is, or should I explain? Basically, think of them as sexual nucleuses with half the number of chromosomes that you would ordinarily see. It will make 2 haploid nucleuses. It will then sort of sidle up to another Tetrahymena Dromophila who also has made 2 haploid nucleuses, and then they will exchange 1 haploid nucleus each. And that then is the reproduction. Those 2 haploid nucleuses then get together and make a diploid organism, and then it goes on being a diploid organism like any other sensible organism. That's roughly how it works. I don't know if that helps.
It does.
Okay, all right. In the back there, yes.
Yeah,
Sorry, I will get you, I promise. Sorry, yes.
First off, thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
So I have 2 questions. This one's pretty quick. So you mentioned that birds, the male has 1 chromosome.
Nope, 2 X chromosomes.
Yeah, sorry, the male has 2 X chromosomes and the female has the Y. So I'm curious, I always thought that like the male was defined as having the Y chromosome. Like how do you even, what is the definition of male, female in birds? That if, the female actually has the Y? Is it just the one that has X?
Yeah, the females lay the eggs. Yeah, no, it's just one of those weird, but see, that's why I put it in. Almost everybody thinks that male is defined as Y chromosome, but it's not. It's just so weird. That's biology. Now, I know you've had a question for a while.
Yeah, so thanks for showing us just how weird biology is, but it's still kind of a mystery why it's so weird. And one of the, so usually the explanation you hear for why some species has some particular reproduction strategy is that it increases the competitive advantage of that individual.
In some way, right, yeah.
And my thinking on this was, I don't know if you know the book Non-Zero by Robert Wright.
No, I don't think I do.
Okay.
How's the last name spelled?
W-R-I-G-H-T.
Okay,
Okay, and that says that nature actually, what nature actually selects for is positive sum games. And so that what that means is that nature has 2 strategies. It has a cooperative strategy and a competitive strategy. So when it's using the cooperative strategy is used for, that explains things like multicellular organisms and symbiosis, which we're finding out there's a lot more symbiosis going on than we thought.
we, by the way, are symbiotic organisms.
Right,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah. So I was just wondering if, all this justification about, for sexual diversity based on a competitive explanation, there might be other explanations that are based on a cooperative analysis.
Quite possibly, although sex works perfectly well in the competitive explanation as well, in the competitive sort of evolutionary viewpoint, as I explained here. But the interesting thing is, this is where you can start getting evolutionary biologists arguing, because you will have some evolutionary biologists who will argue that the only level of selection is the gene. That's what Richard Dawkins argued in The Selfish Gene. So, we like doing things with numbers. So I suspect that it is there that doing it once is kind of. Again, yes.
Sorry.
No, I should say, if somebody else has a question who hasn't had a question, if not, go for it.
Yeah, so this is the second question that I mentioned.
Oh, okay.
So I really liked your quote about, religious fundamentalists should, be just as skeptical about, their own position as, they are behind a philosophical argument that has gained a lot of, I would say, momentum in the last like 15 years. And the argument goes, and the argument is sort of against materialism. And the argument goes something, I guess I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it as an evolutionary biologist and zoologist. And the argument goes something like this. It basically says, you know, evolution and natural selection, you know, they select for sort of neurophysiological states where we have these adaptive behaviors, you know, where we do things that, you know, allow our genes to produce and survive. But it's hard, you know, it doesn't necessarily, it's hard to show like a metaphysical connection between those adaptive behaviors and, you know, true belief states. And the argument basically says, hey, you know, if you're a naturalist and an evolutionist, it's hard to rely on your cognitive faculties to actually have true belief states about metaphysical content. So content like what constitutes evidence for the supernatural, whether or not past exists, whether or not other futures exist, things like this. And so the argument sort of puts, you know, both someone who's a naturalist and an evolutionist in a sort of quandary. And I guess I'm wondering, you know, what your thoughts are on that. Like, if you see that as a challenge to you know, someone who holds both materialism and evolution.
I'm afraid I didn't quite see what the argument was. And I'm not being mean here. I'm asking, you know, can you explain that again? Because I didn't get it.
Yeah. So the argument basically says, you know, evolution, as we understand it, selects for genes that are adaptive, that produce sort of adaptive behavior. But it doesn't necessarily produce beliefs that have true content. And when I say true content, I mean like true metaphysical content.
What is true metaphysical content?
So like the beliefs that we have about what constitutes evidence for the supernatural, beliefs that we have about, you know, whether or not objective reality exists, these sort of whether or not other, you know, self-aware minds exist, things like this. It's sort of like kind of like things that epistemologists talk about a lot.
Right.
And so it's easy to see how evolution would sort of produce adaptive behaviors, but it's sort of hard to see how evolution would produce true beliefs about those sorts of propositions. And so then the argument basically says, hey, you know, if you're an evolutionist and a naturalist, it's very, very hard to see how you can believe your own thoughts about naturalism.
Well, that's kind of the idea. How can you believe your own thoughts about anything?
Right.
And yeah, I mean, that's kind of a problem. In general, however, materialism works really well. We can make predictions based on hypotheses and evidence that correctly predict the future. And supernatural beliefs are actually really lousy at predicting the future. But science actually works. We can actually predict what is going to happen in the future. I can say this vaccination will keep this population from getting smallpox, and you know I'm right. So it actually works out. And it's not just in my mind that people don't die of smallpox anymore. It's for real. People don't die of smallpox anymore. So it's actually borne out in reality, not just in my head, but in the heads of the entire world. So unless you're going to posit a mass delusion, including people who were not even born at the time that the smallpox vaccination came into existence, who never got smallpox, and somehow or other it's not because they didn't believe it in or they did believe in it or whatever, they just didn't get smallpox. So science actually works, and that I think is the best argument for it. For materialism as well. Materialism in this case meaning not going out and buying a lot of stuff, but believing in material reality, believing in the material world. That, by the way, is a tricky thing in using this language, because materialism means something very different when you're talking religious philosophy from when you're talking economics.
Question here.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's okay. So there's evolutionary biology, and then there's evolutionary psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm less good at evolutionary psychology, but carry on.
Well, you know, when I read things online, I'll see ego psych references. You know, that this is, and again, it tends to always go back to gender binaries, even though we're explicitly talking about there not really being queer. I'm just wondering, are there any Are there any really blatantly obvious evo-psych failures that are commonly spread online that you can very easily debunk? Things like, you know, does an alpha male exist amongst the human male population? You know, alpha males, beta males. Is there such a thing as, I won't even posit them, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on where evolutionary biology is incorrectly used to justify sort of junk evolutionary psychology claims.
Yeah, I would say that happens a lot. You know, which is not to say that it's automatically wrong to look at human psychology from an evolutionary perspective. You know, there's something to be said for that. You know, when I get angry because my computer stops working and I start yelling at it, that's not terribly rational. It makes me feel better. But that's because, you know, if you're having a confrontation with somebody who's real, you know, getting in their face might give you an example, it might give you an advantage. So, you know, there's something to be said for looking at human behavior through an evolutionary lens. In fact, I'm going to actually take a quick aside on that, and then you can kind of signal me and say, get back to my question, please. Yeah, human beings do certainly exhibit behaviors that are best explained by evolution. For instance, our love of salt. At this point, we all know that our diets, many people's diets have more salt in them than is actually good for us. But in the natural world, salt is actually pretty rare. And we need it because we sweat salt. So we sweat salt. We don't ordinarily, we sweat salt. In the natural world, salt was pretty hard to get. So therefore, anything that tasted salty tasted good to us. So we crave salt. And the problem is, in the natural environment in which we evolved for, you know, millions of years, there was no such thing as too much salt. And so the idea of an upper limit, just, it was, why bother? I mean, it was a non-starter. And I don't even want to get into design. It's not that we were designed that way. It's that it was never selected against. Wanting salt was never selected against. There was no such thing as too much salt in the natural world. So we crave salt. Now we live in a post-industrial society where we can have all the salt we want. Unfortunately, all the salt we want is more than is good for us. But it still keeps tasting good, you know. And that is, you know, that I would say is evolutionary psychology, you know. We want salt because we evolved in an environment where we got too little salt and we needed it. As for some of the other things, again, I'm using that example to say there are times when it's a useful perspective. But there are also lots of times when it is used to try and justify a certain prejudice or this kind of thing. That's why I quote examples like the emus and this kind of thing, because I've heard people say, well, evolution says that males are going to dominate females. And it's like, take a look at the animal kingdom of evolution before you say that. So it can be misused, certainly. I can't think of examples straight off the bat that I can sort of say, this one's wrong, that one's right. But absolutely, it's sort of a useful perspective, but can be very, very badly misused as well. Does that help at all?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Sure, go ahead.
Oh yeah, so you showed us some examples of homosexuality in the animal kingdom. And I just wondered what, you know, if you talk to people who are naive about evolution, they say that if they're, you know, homosexuality shouldn't be selected for because, you know, it doesn't increase reproduction in genes.
You'd think.
Right. You'd think. So I just, you know, wonder what's the kind of thinking about that. I mean, maybe, you know, one lady said that maybe it's a response to overpopulation, that cuts down the population, or is there some...
Well, it's also just that genetic variability is a wonderful thing.
Is that just genetic variability, would you say?
A population, I'll back up. populations are, natural populations usually have quite a bit of genetic variability in them. This is why you can find people with blue eyes and brown eyes and red hair and black hair and all this kind of thing. Those are just some sort of like obvious markers. The point is that natural populations usually have quite a bit of genetic variability in them. And that's actually a very good thing for a population because it means that whatever external pressure comes at that population, climate change, flooding, a new predator, a new food source, whatever the case may be, there will probably be individuals in that population who have a little bit of a genetic advantage to either exploit that new food source or resist that new disease or whatever the case may be. And then the ones with the sort of random genetic advantages will therefore be the ones that survive and reproduce more in the next generation. The population will slowly start getting a new normal in terms of genetic variability. And there are always mutations.
Although that argument is still a little tough with respect to homosexuality. You have to have some indirect path by which that's true because the direct path to increasing reproduction.
Yeah, but it can be around in the population. There's also a lot of evidence now for health, for actually that there is selective advantage in a population. Again, this gets into the whole thing of group selection and population biology again. But where there are advantages to having some non-reproducing or older members of the population available. This is seen a lot with things like what's called haunting. But this is just basically that, let's say you have nesting birds. If there are other individuals around who will help parent birds, that certainly helps the parent birds, and it helps that population in general. If you are slightly related to those children, then being a good uncle or a good aunt is actually very helpful. And with long-lived species like human beings, there's a fair amount of evidence for grandparents being a useful thing as well. So there are a lot of different things that can be positive. But, you know, as I said, for political purposes, I kind of prefer sticking to the really obvious stuff like they exist, you know, because that's the kind of thing that's much hard. You know, you can wonder about things, and there's a, you know, you can come up with hypotheses, and you can go out into nature and test them, not by doing an experiment, except sometimes, but just by saying, you know, let's see what we can find under various different environmental circumstances. And, you know, and like any other kind of science, sometimes you see what you're expecting and sometimes you don't. So there's a lot of good research to be done on that. But as I said, kind of the short thing for political purposes, I think, is to simply say, they exist. That gets already done.
And then while we're on ethics and science and politics, one thing I always say is, I think racism is a failure of science education. That always surprises people when they hear that, but I think just the whole concept of race in our society is just, to my mind, completely incoherent.
It's pretty darn weird.
Yeah, I mean, we have races for black skin and white skin, but we don't have races for for blue eyes and brown eyes. We don't have races for tall and short people. There are a million, you know, thousands of inherited phenotypes that we don't somehow coalesce them into races. You know, that race construct.
Yeah, no, I mean, we are all genetically so close that, you know, it's
or
not.
you hear, you know, the Palestinian people and the Israeli people as if they were different species.
Yeah,
I mean, why don't scientists just say, you know, call bullshit on that race concept?
Well, scientists do, but again, scientists generally don't like getting into the political arena. But here's a great example, if you want to use one. This is with, what is it? I can't remember the species of gull. I think it's black-headed gulls, but I'm not sure. Anyway, race circles, or Rassenkreisen, as they are known in Germany. There's this really great example of this with seagulls, where down, you know what the map of Great Britain looks like. You England with Scotland, and then you have Ireland, this kind of thing. The point is, down at the bottom of that set of islands, actually, I won't start at the bottom, I'll start in the Atlantic Ocean. Nearest, the part nearest the U.S., there in the western Atlantic, you have a certain species of seagull. And it has, and I wish I could remember the name of the species or exactly what the marker is, but we will say it has blackheads or something like this. So as you go north along the coast of Great Britain, it slowly changes. And it goes around, and I'm going to say, it winds up with a gray head or something like this. I don't remember the exact one, I wish I did. But the point is, then as you are going down the eastern side of Great Britain, it continues to change and continues to change and continues to change until you get down at the bottom where you have these two different populations that really look different. One blackhead, one whitehead. But they are actually all the same species. If you talk to bird watchers down in the south, they'll say, no, they're two different ones. But if you actually follow it all around, it's actually the exact same species that has gone through a series of color gradations as it goes around the British Isles. This is known, as I said, as a race circle or Raskin price. And there are other examples of it, but that's kind of a nice one. So that's kind of a useful example of, okay, see, things can look different and still be the same species, and they're going to vary in different places. And, so what? I mean, as I said, I think that's one that may actually help in the race discussion.